Hi everyone, this is a short revision screencast for Independent Colleges Dublin for CIMA E1 for the November 2014 exam. And I draw your attention to the CIMA website, question 3 of May 2010, and if you're using the BPP revision kit, then question 5 of page 5. Now, in this particular screencast, we're going to be looking at really the BRIC economies. We're just going to look at part A here, the emergence of the BRIC economies and the factors associated with that emergence. Pretty popular exam topic for your E1 exam. It's really a good idea to have a grip on these factors. So if I take you just briefly through the scenario, what you'll see typically that the examiner does is just some brief information in relation to an entity, an organization, in this case G Banking Group. They're looking to offshore to India, part of their back office operations, obviously India being part of the BRIC group. As a result of this offshoring, there seems to be some redundancies, and what the bulk of the scenario talks about here is just really the sort of the impact of the redundancies on particular stakeholders. For example, the National Secretary of the Banking Union is not too happy with the redundancies, and obviously the company and indeed the CEO are trying to justify them in some way. We'll just stick with the BRIC economies and their emergence for this particular question. So that's simply part A. Okay, so if we look at the answer to this, what you'll see is that the answer is sort of split into two parts. Okay, and this is the way that you should go about something of this vein if it does come up. Really what we're looking at is sort of some general factors and then some factors that are specific or may be specific to each of the BRIC countries in one way or another. So what they start off with is just a simple introduction here saying that really there's two sides to it. There's, the aspects of history for each country and also some general factors, for example, IT, globalization, etc. Okay, so the first part that they deal with here is just this issue of really general globalization even. And what you'll see in this first paragraph they do is they define what globalization is. And what they say is just really the interdependence of countries, and just the idea that the fact that the world is becoming smaller through a variety of factors which are outlined here, it makes freedom of movement of goods and freedom of factors of production much more possible, and as a result of that, what you're going to have is economic transactions being initiated with a variety of different countries because of that interdependence and indeed because of that freedom. Okay, so the specific factors, and you'll see that they list them down here in relation to globalization, are very much the sort of thing that perhaps common sense would lead you to put down on paper. I mean, the first thing is the obvious one of the internet and communications. Second point really relates to sort of infrastructure and the idea that indeed the world's becoming a smaller place because of the improvements in travel. They even mention sort of jumbo jets here. Next point is just really the convergence of taste. What you'll find is that obviously because of ease of travel and indeed the media, you'll find that people's tastes are converging. So there is a sort of a demand for a multitude of different types of goods and indeed services across the world. Okay. Next point they mention is really the organizations such as WTO, who have sort of done a lot of work to sort of reduce barriers between countries. And if you imagine that these barriers 50, 60, 70 years ago would have been much higher, the chances of trade between countries via globalization would have been much less. Okay. Now, as a result of the factors above, IT and infrastructure, etc., what you'll find is that multinational companies, as they've made, the point that I've made here, or M&Es, really have sort of taken advantage of opportunities to really conduct their sort of businesses on a global basis. So there are opportunities for large companies to expand their customer base. Okay. Final point here really is they talk about really a summary. Okay, and it's really a reiteration of what we said above, just this idea that globalization enables companies to find sort of wider markets for their products. And then they do just a quick quick summary of, easier access to capital, obviously technology, skilled labor, and indeed expertise. Okay, so those are the main factors in a broad sense. And then what they do in the next part, as I said above, is that they talk about factors that are perhaps more specific to some or perhaps even all of the BRIC economies. So really what we're talking about there is really internal developments over the last 40, 50, 60 years. And the key one there is really the attitude of governments. And what you'll find is, to a large extent, countries have moved from what we call planned to more free market economies. And as a result of that, sort of rules or bureaucratic rules have been removed. And there's a certain amount of stability that perhaps wouldn't have been there perhaps 50 to 60 years ago in some of these countries. These factors don't all necessarily apply to India, but they will apply to one or other of the BRIC economies. So as a result of sort of government action and the breaking down of barriers, what you'll find is that inward investment has been attracted to these countries, and that leads to development. Next point they make is that really the starting point for the BRIC economies, if you imagine that if they're starting from a lower point, then the ease of growth or indeed the speed of growth would be much easier to facilitate. Next point just really relates to sort of labor and indeed agricultural techniques. Again, that links into the point about sort of technology and perhaps to some extent IT, this idea that new techniques will lead to efficiencies in production, and therefore if you couple that with a sort of a large sort of labor force and indeed low wage rates, you'll see that they're very, very attractive economies for inward investment and even for homegrown investment too. Okay. Next points here are just related to the sort of the emergence of a well-educated workforce. And you'll find that that will make it, or that will have made it, much more attractive to multinationals, and particularly countries like India. Some may say that perhaps have a more educated workforce than some countries in Western Europe. Next point is just in relation to resources. I'll give you a quick example there. Russia with oil, Brazil in obviously agriculture, and indeed iron ore. So just the availability of natural resources, which can be provided perhaps more cheaply than other countries, is an incentive. Okay. Next point, perhaps linked into the sort of taste issue and also the development of education. You find a development in the urban middle class and with an associated uplift in the amount of disposable income or money available to spend on a variety of goods. Okay, and as a result of this, and this is really, I guess, a sort of a summary point, in effect, what they're saying here when they talk about a sort of a virtuous circle is really that all of these factors will come together, not least IT, improvement of education, raw materials, natural resources, etc. All of these will come together to really result in the emergence of these countries, and indeed a sort of a multiplier effect, which obviously impacts upon overall GDP. Okay, so that's just a quick revision summary on BRIC and the sorts of things that you would need to refer to if this sort of area comes up, and I hope that's been helpful to you. Many thanks.